This is the 10-Minute Contrarian Podcast. This is VP. We are a solutions-based podcast, diving into the world of contrarian investing and alternative finance. You can find us hosted on the No Nonsense Forex YouTube channel, NoNonsenseForex.com, and podcast players everywhere. Episode 183 is brought to us by Bybit. Attention, people in the EU. Your government hates you and is getting more and more hostile towards crypto, while other governments are going the other way. This just came out. I received an email from a member this week telling me what I'm about to tell you right now. None of you can participate in any events that your broker holds. Your crypto broker, that is. So I got further clarity on this. Something like copy trading would not be an event, where something like an airdrop or obviously like the World Series of Trading would be an event. Now, of course, this applies to any platform you're on, not just Bybit. So as far as trading goes, you may as well go with a very large, well-capitalized broker such as Bybit that has great customer service, tons of options. And let's just hope the pendulum finally swings back your way, because the extra benefits you get with my link, which is down below in the Bybit blog, extend to more than just events, but you're still going to want to participate in them because with Bybit, membership does have its rewards. It is the 10-Minute Contrarian Podcast, and I'm glad I'm doing this episode now as opposed to this same time, maybe 7 or 10 days ago. Because there was quite the euphoria in the crypto world, especially at the time. And you can't really tell people to do rational things when there is euphoria. Now, I hope my audience would be a little more wise to this, but I have a feeling the majority of you still aren't going to be super receptive to things like what I'm about to tell you today when things are going really well. Because why would you? Everything's going to be great. Everything's going to be up only. All the bad stuff in this world has magically been fixed overnight. Unless you're in Europe, of course, where things just continue to suck all the time. Maybe my European subscribers will listen to me. But for the rest of you, it's not easy. I just tweeted yesterday saying in not so many words, when I took profit on a lot of my crypto this past week, I don't think a lot of y'all did the same. I mean, you're supposed to. You guys probably said you were going to do it back when we talked about it. But as is the case in every bull market or every pump, there's always a million reasons why it's going to be up only, and taking profit now would be silly. And as soon as you start thinking that, here comes the drop. And let me tell you, this drop was one of the silliest drops I've ever seen, and we have seen a lot of very irrational drops in this market. And so I tweeted about this too because I was away while the FOMC meetings were going on this week, and I asked you guys, I said, hey, why is crypto dropping the way it is? I figure maybe it's something to do with the FOMC, but stocks aren't dropping. So what's happening? And a few of you guys, very astute listeners of the podcast who actually listen to Powell speak, which God bless you, chimed in and said that Powell said that there is no way for the Federal Reserve to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve, which has been a big talk these past few weeks with this new presidency coming in. Now, two things on that. I think something like a strategic Bitcoin reserve, if you have the deepest pockets in the world, which is the United States government, buying Bitcoin, one, it's going to prompt other governments to do it as well. And two, the lack of something like this would not prevent Bitcoin from being at $100,000. Something like this, in my opinion, would prevent Bitcoin from being at $300,000. Yet because Powell said, and I went back and listened to this myself, it was about a 20-second blurb that was like the real money shot. He said that there's no way for the Federal Reserve to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And I'm paraphrasing, but I listened to it and I'm like, well, yeah, okay, so what? The Federal Reserve doesn't really do that. They don't hold the strategic gold reserve. The Treasury does that. I didn't think the Fed was going to be responsible for that either. The Fed is not even really a bank or does any type of custody services. They're more or less just like this mafia of people who are still allowed to exist somehow. I wouldn't want them holding our Bitcoin either. Could you imagine putting them in charge? Anyway, but because Chairman Powell came up and stated the absolute obvious, we saw a peak-to-trough drop in Bitcoin from about 108 down to 92,000. And this was completely boneheaded. I saw this drop and I bought more crypto because humans are dumb and humans are going to human. And every time they do human things in the crypto market and price goes down, that has typically been a very, very good opportunity for people like us to swoop in and buy more on the dips that we've been waiting for. Now, when dips happen for legitimate reasons, okay, maybe it's time to wait and see if price can drop further. But when they really don't, and we've seen this so many times, I've always tried to jump on it. Because look, long term, there is euphoria all over the world. In terms of crypto specifically, let's just talk about that for a moment. I had said before, despite all of the hostility around the world, and especially in the US at the time, crypto persevered really, really well and continued to move forward and get greater adoption and get partnerships with large companies. Yet there were still a lot of restrictions, and there were a lot of people standing in the way, unlawfully, by the way. Yet they were just able to do whatever they wanted with no checks and balances. But now, with the past election, all of this has changed. There has appeared, at least, to be a movement to give power back to the people. And keeping this financial, there has been the floodgates opening in terms of crypto, to where now the majority of people in Congress in the United States and the vast, vast majority of Trump's cabinet picks are pro-crypto. They realize the stupidity of stifling the future of money and payments and computing and everything, all because the big banks wished it so. There was also a very interesting compromise which has taken place in probably the last 2 years, and I'm going to save this talk for the January prediction episodes. I have to be really careful not to cannibalize material there. So we're going to talk about macro, we're going to talk about crypto in the January episodes, and I'll go more into some of these things. But suffice to say, for the first time in a long time, there's real positivity around the world just based on what happened in the United States. Even Europe, who continues to just eat it, at least they see what happened on the other side of the pond and know that there could be hope around the corner for the Western world. Australia as well. I even popped into some of the doomer forums, and they are looking for other things to doom about because that is their oxygen. And I've said it before. I wrote an entire blog about this. Doomers are wrong about almost everything. And the few things they do get right, it never quite happens to the magnitude that they say it's going to happen. Just remember that. However, this is always the time where people let their guards down. And go look at history. The worst times in our history, the scariest times in our history, never happen when we are prepared for it. They always happen when sentiment hits all-time highs. Never fails. If you just look in the United States alone, there's so much euphoria going on right now before Trump even enters office because things that needed to get done for a long time are actually getting done. Congress has realized, you mean people really, really hate it when we waste their money and don't tell them about it and hide it from them? Well, we don't want our names attached to something like that. You mean we have to be held accountable for things now? And so sentiment for the people who are seeing this happen, I think right now is at an all-time high. There's all this hope for what's about to happen, what could happen. The problem with that, however, is if you just look at sentiment on its own, right? It can't really go much higher than it's gone right now. I think there's only one place for it to go. Reality is going to have to hit at some point, and it's probably going to happen sooner than later. Once this new administration gets in, we're going to see what they actually can and can't do, and we are going to see and feel the effects, good or bad. I'm not an expert on tariffs, for one, but they could have either very positive or negative effects on the overall economy, or maybe they will just positively affect the United States economy and destroy every other economy. You just don't know. I'm not going to sit there and listen to ghost stories perpetuated by the other side. Just like doomer predictions, they're almost always wrong. And they're just trying to get you to feel a certain way, and they know fear is the number one driver of human sentiment. I am taking a step back and letting this all happen and just adjusting accordingly. But we have to look at reality as well. In Congress alone, there are a handful of Republicans who vehemently oppose anything Trump wants to do. So even though the Republicans won a majority in Congress, it's not as big of a majority as you would see on paper. Everybody's getting excited about DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. They're going to piss a lot of people off. Just remember that. Probably Republicans too. And Vivek even said it, and I'm glad he said it because it's obvious and everybody should know it. Milei said it in Argentina. Transitions do hurt. They're not seamless. You're going to have to eat a little bit of shit along the way here. So be prepared for that. You don't just flip a switch and everything's good again. Actions do have consequences. And we may have to take many steps backwards before we go forwards. And what's sentiment going to look like during those times? It's not going to be as high as it is right now as I'm talking to you. There's only one way for sentiment to go. Plus, let's not forget the other side, the Democrats, the left, the people who have just lost power. Do you think they are going to take this lightly? These are very powerful, well-funded people who are great at propaganda. They got the world to freak out over so many things that either weren't even real or just simply weren't as big of a deal as they were made out to be. They got the world to flip out about a lot of things in order for them to get us to think a certain way and vote a certain way and act a certain way and to support all of their endeavors. And now they are cornered animals. Not only did they lose, but they're going to be forced to own up to a lot of the stuff they've done. And you're going to tell me they're not going to fight back and try to sabotage this new administration at every step along the way? Of course they're going to do that. And what's that going to look like? It's going to be ugly. They're already doing as much as they possibly can this month leading up to the inauguration. All of these things, it turns out to be, are very unpopular. The American people have expressed this through their voting. Yet, because at the end of the day, it was never really about us. They sure did a great job pretending, but it was never really about us. They're just going to do what their overlords want them to do, and they're going to set this new administration up to fail as much as possible. Get ready for 4 years of this. It's going to be a war. And you need to be prepared for this war. RIP to anybody who's getting caught up in this euphoria. I'm telling you now. Sure, I do expect a lot of good things to come out of this administration. I'm not pessimistic on that. But I also know it's probably going to come at a cost. And let's not forget, too, is recession no longer on the table simply because we voted in a new president and a new administration? Of course not. I talked about this in the election episode. I said if Kamala wins, the recession is probably going to happen earlier, so they'll have a chance to recover. If Trump wins, then the powers that be, who are not in favor of Trump because Trump plays ball with them, at least less than the left does. Then strategically, it would make perfect sense to wait and let this euphoria crest even higher, if that's even possible, and then pull the plug, maybe 2 or 3 years into the administration, to where it's so severe that they just can't possibly clean up the mess in time for the next election. So you still have that there. And all of the recession metrics that we had in place not even a year ago, they're all still there. And in many cases, they're arguably worse. Now, I'm not sure how it is in your neck of the woods. I imagine it's not great, but in the U.S. and Canada, credit card delinquencies are at all-time highs. Not century highs, not decade highs, all-time highs. Car loan delinquencies, home loan delinquencies are also at all-time highs. The banks right now are about as unhealthy as they've ever been. And the large ones in the United States are getting sued heavily on top of it all. Economies have a really hard time growing when banks don't lend money, and they have not been lending a lot of money at all these past few years. And even if the future looks brighter on this front, you still have to pay for the years prior, which leads me into what the Fed is doing. Tell me, why would you lower rates if the economy is doing just fine? You lower rates to stimulate a falling economy. Now, the one exception, because we said the Fed is a political animal, and that political animal is a left-leaning political animal, and the reason why they dropped rates before the election was likely to increase sentiment going into it, because higher sentiment is better for the incumbent, or in this case, the incumbent party. But to do it again, now I understand, once you start dropping, you kind of have to keep dropping. But not only did he do it, he also said in that speech that we're going to be slowing down on this a bit, which just led to all types of confusion. Now, if you've heard my talk on macro and rate dropping in the past, we have a chart we like to look at. I'm not even going to link it. You guys are going to have to find it this time, but it's not hard to find. Go to the St. Louis Fed website and type in interest rates in the United States, and then find the chart that has the gray shaded in areas that denote recessions. You will see that anytime rates go up sharply, flatten out, and then drop, a recession always follows. And I've said in the past, it's not the drop that causes the recession. That doesn't make any sense. It's the rise that causes the recession. And the reason why you don't see it right away is because there is a lag effect. And the reason why rates always drop right before is because the Fed knows this, and they're trying to get ahead of things, trying to get things good and stimulated again so the recession doesn't last years. And I still feel like that's what's happening here. History has been very good to us on this one in terms of predicting what's about to happen. And so all of that is still in play. And this administration does understand that you might have to go backwards to go forwards. I don't think, I'm sure they would like the economy to be strong all 4 years, but I think they understand that it just can't be that way. And I think there are people in that cabinet that understand that as far as certain things go, you just got to let it burn. And when you do things like that, when you do things the right way, and you look out for the long term and the actual future, what does that look like in the meantime during that transitional phase? I'm telling you, contrarians, there's a lot of people with their guards down right now. And as the host of a financial prepping podcast, I need to point this out to all of you. Financial prepping is not super hard, but it's not the easiest thing in the world, too. And because people are naturally lazy, a lot of you are going to look for reasons to not only put your guard down, but to stop any prepping measures because you feel like they're just not as necessary as they were before, possibly. And I think you people are in for a very rude awakening. So, in this solutions-based podcast, what are the solutions? Well, that's pretty much all we've talked about in the more defensive episodes of this podcast. And you have a whole database of them you can go back and reference. The defensive episodes in particular are a lot more timeless than the offensive episodes. Because sometimes things that are good buys aren't always good buys later. But I think most of our offensive episodes are pretty timeless as well. But the defensive episodes, for sure. Let me just put it this way. If financially you are ever going to get got, just make sure if you get got that they only get a piece of you. And the smaller piece they take from you, the better. Now, how do you make that piece as small as possible? You spread yourself out as much as possible with your investments, with your bank accounts, with your own residency. And in many cases, you can prevent getting got altogether. We did an episode on basic OPSEC, for example. And if you're spread out enough, if your country or your crazy government ever does something crazy, if you have dug exit tunnels, then you can simply take your money from the crazy country and move it into a not crazy country, and then these things don't affect you like they will the vast, vast majority of your countrymen. And on this podcast, we have shown you how to do all of these things. Do not ask me where to go in the comments section. Simply go to the podcast player of your choice or go to YouTube, go to my channel, type in the search bar, the thing you are interested in knowing, and just see what pops up. You might be surprised. But the big thing I want to leave you with here is I know some of you guys are lazy with your stop losses as well. I know in some cases you may not even have stop losses. Now, I've told you the very few things out of the many investments I have that I do not have stop losses on, things like Bitcoin, Litecoin, and I have very specific reasons for doing that. But I have stop losses almost everywhere else, and I don't just have them in my head like some of you do, because that's really a problem. Because if we do see a market drop and you have this stop loss in your head somewhere, one, you might forget where it was. Two, by the time price gets there, you might start waffling on whether you should actually pull the trigger on it. To where at least if it's written down somewhere, on a notepad or on a spreadsheet somewhere, at least there's a better chance that you would actually follow your own rules. Again, humans are still going to human, humans are stupid, and that also includes some of you. And you're going to end up getting yourself wrecked. Again, don't let anything take you down all the way. Make sure if they get you, no matter who it is, if it's the government, if it's your wife, if it is the market itself, make sure if they get you, they only get a small piece of you. On my other podcast, the Trading Psychology podcast, Rob and I talked about a man who's probably the greatest investor of all time, Jesse Livermore. I think you could probably argue it because he was also an idiot when it came to his downside, and he lost his entire fortune many times over and likely committed suicide as a result. But when he was on, there was nobody better. And I'm like, man, just imagine if the people who got completely annihilated during any of the crypto drops we've seen, or even back to the great financial crisis or the dot-com crash, what if those people, instead of losing 95% of their net worth, what would happen if they only lost like 15% or 20%? Imagine this. Imagine you have $1 million, right? And that's all you have. And you worked really hard to make that million. And then in a short amount of time, you take it all the way down to 40K. Like, that's what happens to people who are unprepared. And I'm sure those people laughed and said, haha, this could never happen to me, for reasons X, Y, and Z. Again, imagine instead of taking their money all the way down to 40K, they only took their money down to like 800K and got to start fresh with that instead of starting fresh with 40K, which is really tough to come back from. I mean, to get back to $1 million, if you only had 40K left, what is that? My math is not good anymore. What is that, 25x to get back to $1 million? You know how hard that is? As opposed to a simple 25% if you only took it down to 800K. You understand this? Win by not losing. Rule number one, just don't die. Don't get wrecked. But again, nobody thinks about downside protection during times like this. So it's a perfect time for me to come in and yell at everybody and say, look, do not only let your guard down, but stop the prepping process. If you don't have measures in place now, you better start. As a real contrarian, the time is not necessarily to start playing offense. I think there is room to play offense in some places. Again, like I said, I just bought crypto like in the last 24 hours. But any true contrarian knows when sentiment is high, that is exactly the time to start prepping even harder. And during times like this, you might even look like a doomer if you're going to be out there defending yourself against a possible rough time ahead. Because there's a lot less people out there who think there are going to be rough times ahead. But are the masses normally right, or are the masses normally wrong? Exactly. We're not crazy. We're just early.